Hello to everyone out there watching this on YouTube or whatever other medium it is that it's found its way onto in the coming months. I'm Mark Thibodeau for Cosmic Horror Monthly, and with me today is Ramsey Campbell, arguably, and in my opinion, for whatever that's worth, the single greatest writer of horror fiction alive and working today. Currently in his sixth decade of impressive productivity, you'd be hard-pressed to name a horror-adjacent genre to which Ramsey hasn't put his talents to use. From science fiction to high fantasy to hard-boiled true detective tales to novelizations of the classic Universal monster movies. For readers of Cosmic Horror Monthly, however, for whom this interview is being conducted, it is as the prime purveyor of what is regularly referred to as cosmic horror or weird fiction, in honor of Weird Tales and H.P. Lovecraft, who gives it another one of its names, Mythos horror. That we are talking with Ramsey today, although hopefully we'll touch on other things as well. But I would let's see, Ramsey, you got your start as a teenager at the legendary Arkham House Publications and working under the no less legendary August Derleth, like literally as a 16-year-old.
That is right. That's right. Or if you want to put it even further back, 15 was when I sent my my first Lovecraftian stories to Derleth. There's a bit of an anecdote on that, really. Okay, very difficult for anybody listening now to believe this unless you know it, but in 1960, up until 1960, there was no single British paperback collection of Lovecraft story ever to be had. You know, you just couldn't find them. The occasional story in an anthology, usually hardcover. Some of the Derleth science fiction anthologies, he would slip one in there, one of the relatively minor things like From Beyond, or I don't know, Beyond the Wall of Space, that sort of thing. Good stories, but not the crucial Lovecraft. And so these were the main things that I'd encountered. When I was 7 or 8, mind you, I had read The Colour Out of Space in a Groff Conklin anthology. And not only did it terrify me, but I actually, for the very first time in my youthful experience, the sense of reading something kind of forbidden. This is too much. And I mean, I got everything going on in the story, but it just, it took it that bit further than I'd previously read. No, I've read M.R. James, I've read E.F. Benson, some of them, in anthologies again, because I started very, very early reading in the field. But Lovecraft was something different, something beyond, if you like. So anyway, it comes 1960, and I get to read my very first complete collection of Lovecraft, which is a book called Cry Horror, originally The Lurking Fear, edited by Don Wollheim in the, I believe, the late 40s for Avon Books, as it then was. And it contains some of Lovecraft's greatest stories: The Rats in the Walls, The Call of Cthulhu, or however we're going to pronounce him, of The Colour Out of Space again, and some minor stuff like, say, the Moonbog and so on, Lurking Fear. But it was wall-to-wall Lovecraft. That was the thing. Now I actually, I'll tell you what, I actually skived off school the following day after I'd bought this for £0.50. I just spent the entire day reading this. Now I loved the field already. I already had goes at trying to imitate favourite writers. I had to go at Arthur Machen, John Dixon Carr, who of course is a crime writer, but has a decided sense of macabre atmosphere as well. But once I'd read this book by Lovecraft, it was pretty immediately evident to me, I think, that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to imitate this. And of course, that age, you're also kind of persuading yourself you're doing as well as your idol, which of course I wasn't, but that's a different matter. And I did what a lot of people do, which is to imitate the easy bits. I went for the purple prose, which is much less in Lovecraft than his detractors claim, and actually there's much less than some of his defenders claim if it comes to that. Those passages are very, very carefully built up to. But obviously there are stories like, let us say, The Lurking Fear, where it's pretty heavy on, or The Hound, which is pretty heavy on the purple prose. And this is the stuff that's, theoretically easiest to imitate. That's what I did. Wrote 3, 4, 5 stories. All of them longhand, still do that actually. My first drafts are always longhand. And I mentioned them to a fellow fan, Pat Kearney, who is now, among other things, a bibliographical historian, who published a fanzine, and he asked if could he see them, and such was my youthful enthusiasm that I actually sent off the only copy through the ordinary mail. So if that had got lost in the post, we'd never know about me ever again, I suspect, because I would have been too depressed to continue. But anyway, it got there. He read the stories. He asked if he could use one of them in his fanzine, and I said, okay, fine. Why not? I'd love to see something in publication. But he and one of his readers, Betty Kujawa, American fan, suggested I should show the stories to August Derleth. Now, this was not, dear Mr. Derleth, will you publish my stories? This was simply, and this is how the letter read, that I wrote. This was a sort of query letter really to August. You are the great, the world's great authority on Lovecraft. Could you tell me if these stories are any good? That's all I wanted, basically, his opinion. Well, he wrote back saying, well, listen, we're going to need to look at these stories anyway because, you're drawing upon copyrighted material and you need permission. So, send them over, type them up first, send them over. So here I am, 15, getting on for 16, and he duly reads the story, sends his letter back saying, basically saying these stories did a lot of work, and by God, was he right? Not least because they were set in Massachusetts. I'd never been out of Lancashire, never mind into America at that time, and by gum did it ever show. So he said, listen, you need to relocate these to England, and you need to flesh them out, and you need to tell, not show. I beg your pardon, show, not tell, which I went in for a lot, as Lovecraft did to some extent, of course. So I was modelling myself very closely. But he said, if you do all the work that I'm going to suggest, he sent me a long editorial letter and write more stories along these lines, it's possible this might be a book for us to publish. Not even 16 yet. That's pretty fighting talk, isn't it? So once I've picked myself up and also stopped thinking, he's completely wrong about this editing. I'm right, and he's wrong, which you tend to do. And half an hour later, I thought, well, actually, maybe he is right, as again you do. And so, I did. I rewrote the stories. I wrote more stories in the general area. Meanwhile, he asked to use one of them in a new, all new horror anthology, Dark Mind, Dark Heart, which he got out in '62. So I sent him what I then called The Tomb Herd, but which he retitled The Church on High Street. And in fact, it was agreed between us that, he could edit the story as he saw fit. Now, it's not something I would ever do again, but then, yes, it was right. The story did need editing. Now, I would have liked, if it had been possible for him to send me, basic suggestions of what bits were needed improvement, and I would have done it myself. But such was the scheduling for publication that there wasn't time for all that stuff. He needed to go for it and do it. He did. Interestingly enough, S.T. Joshi, great Lovecraftian scholar, he says he can't spot the joins. He can't tell where I finish and Derleth begins. Oh, yeah. I can to some extent, I think, but I don't have an absolute recall of this. I can sort of spot the differences in style, sure. But
it's been 50 years now, so
there's a puzzle for people. Yes, they can try it too. So anyway, he published that one. I'm 16 years old. Here I am alongside Robert Bloch. H. Russell Wakefield. For heaven's sake,
it's really.
And then 2 years later, out comes The Inhabitant of the Lake, and I'm kind of launched on my way in the world.
Wow, it's incredible. It really, I was wondering if the brashness of youth had played any role, and it doesn't sound like it. It sounds more like, I don't want to say luck, but Providence, maybe.
Well, listen, it was luck, and I think it's an absolute, and it's an old cliche, but listen, I think it genuinely was a case of being in the right place at the right time. And the reason for that is this, and it only relatively recently occurred to me this, reading over our correspondence, you'll know that, all my correspondence with August has been published as a collection, again, edited by S.D. for PS Publishing, book called Letters to Arkham. Yeah. Yes. Now, You see, what was interesting was that he, in the course of our correspondence, he basically gave me the impression he felt written out as far as writing Lovecraftian stories was concerned. You know, he himself didn't really feel up to doing many more of them. He really felt he'd exhausted that vein of himself. And so, you know, along comes this new writer who's doing Lovecraftian fiction and who, you know, with a bit of editorial, well, with quite a lot of editorial help, you know, can produce something that's publishable. And of course, I think August saw this is the way to keep the Lovecraft's name alive. You know, this new guy will help because, you know, we'll publish him via Arkham House and that will have the same effect. So I think that was my great stroke of luck. And, you know,
so right away, he saw you as a potential inheritor of the mantle of Lovecraft.
Well, in a very small way, you know, for heaven's sake, you know, and, you know, as he says, I think on the blurb for the Inhabitant, you know, they reflect in their own small way the greater wonders and terrors of Lovecraft, which is very accurate. You know, they certainly don't scale those peaks, to put it mildly. No, not at all. And one thing that I do find sort of interesting, looking back over the Inhabitant stories, is this was not a conscious process, but I can sort of see myself working through the various Lovecraftian modes. So, you know, you've got the very florid mode that was in the church in High Street. You've got the relatively restrained mode of something like, say, the room in the castle. The Horror from the Bridge tries to do a sort of Dunwich horror, a very elaborate narrative with, you know, lots of climaxes in it. And the Insects from Shigei is fundamentally, I suppose, a kind of At the Mountains of Madness,
the
history of the alien race. Now, this is what I have to say. This one thing about the Insects from Shigei. I mean, I know some people like it, and I'm very happy that people do like that old stuff of mine. But I've always regretted that story, and I'll tell you why. It's based on one of Lovecraft's last notes in his commonplace book. Yeah. You know, it was a dream he had, and if only he'd lived long enough to write his story on that theme, that would have been, I think, one of his greatest stories. Now, you may remember that what the note is basically, he dreams he's walking in a forest, and this swarm of insects comes into his face and immediately enters him, and he's loaded with their memories of alien environments, you know, alien experiences. Now, this is a great idea. And what I ruined it by doing was by making the giant insects that pilot a craft through space, which is not what he meant, you know. And I was obviously my enthusiasm got the better of me, and I just forgot what Lovecraft had put in his note. And I regretted this so much that I actually, and I've done this for quite a number of the stories, we'll probably talk about this later on, but, you know, I regretted that particular one so much that I actually went back to the idea in a novel called The Darkest Part of the Woods. And this time I did do the thing in the forest with just a swarm of insects. And I think I got it a little better that time. I hope so anyway.
I was going to bring that up, that I think in one of your, maybe in the introduction in Cold Print, you mentioned that you made that mistake and you went back and realized afterward, like, oh, he didn't mean giant insects.
That's right. But of course, the weird thing is that now, particularly in gaming, you know, where the giant insects have taken over, folks, so beware.
They're still very cool. Like I have to say, they're very cool, and they look cool as miniatures as well. Like, I'm going to bring up the Sandy Peterson stuff towards the end of the interview if there's time. Now we're talking about your teen years, but it seems to me that you know, talking about starting out early in this stuff, but even before that, it seems like circumstances were leading you towards exploring the darker side of life, as your family situation was, to put it mildly, quite difficult. And you've been open about it before. I don't know if you'd rather not talk about it. That's fine.
No, I can talk about it. Sure. Yeah.
But do you feel in any way that writing darker material or reading or writing darker material was a way to help you cope with darkness in your own life? Because I feel that it has with myself. Had a therapeutic element to it, especially, you know, reading, because I don't write so much. But
yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, I used to theorize. Well, let's just give folk the background first, actually. You know, because the thing was, you know, my parents were estranged at a ridiculously early in my life. You know, I was 3 years old actually when, you know, there was a terminal split. But what was much weirder in some ways, which I mean that's not in itself weird at all, was that they split, but they continued to live in this, and I did, this same tiny house. You know, it was like, you know, 2 rooms downstairs and not very big ones either. And upstairs 3. Someone managed to fit in 3 bedrooms and you know, a kind of bathroom and toilet combined. You know, they got 4 rooms upstairs, and you know, then you have these 3 people. Well, 2 basically. You know, my mother and father did not speak mostly for the next 20 years, and equally I didn't see my father, who became this. Basically, this monstrous figure you heard in the night, you know, coming upstairs when I was young, and you know, I was going upstairs when I was older. I was still, you know, I hadn't got up to bed myself then, and you know, who would be heard on the other side of the door and so forth, would actually hold the door shut so that we wouldn't come face to face. Now, you know, top this with the fact that my mother sadly was an undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, you know, and from a very, very early age, I realized that, you know, that she was not really being talked about on the radio and under a, you know, and they weren't really putting her under other names into radio serials, and the neighbours were not really writing about her in the newspaper using assumed names, and you know, and they weren't really conspiring about it. I had to, you know, figure this all out for myself, like, you know, again, about 3 years old, you know, was the start of my being able to separate what she perceived from what was real. And so I said, I used to feel that, you know, as I think you said, that reading horror fiction was kind of packaging up my terror and, you know, putting it away, you know, having made it manageable. But the trouble with that theory, you see, is that when I used to read M.R. James, or, you know, Lovecraft, you know, when I was young, or the, you know, the other masters, basically, you know, I'd lie awake in bed at night in a state of spectral panic. So it certainly wasn't taking it away. It was doing that at all. I think the thing that separates, which is not quite the answer to your question, but a kind of, you know, a sidebar, if you like, is that, you know, what separates the horror fan from other folk is that, you know, we may experience that intensity of terror, but then when we've recovered, then we want some more. You know, we either want the same, go back to that story, read it again, or we want more stories like it. You know, that's kind of what, you know, identifies us really.
Explorers.
So the question is, you know, to what extent would I have read those stories anyway? It's like asking, if I weren't who I am, who would I be? You know, who can say? It's impossible to know. What I do think, well, what I'm quite sure of is that a lot of the sort of themes and preoccupations of what I write, you know, particularly once I move beyond, you know, imitating Lovecraft to writing my own kind of fiction, you know, about my own kinds of terror, if you like, is that I do think those experiences certainly, you know, were a formative influence on the kind of horror that I write. You know, on the one hand, the psychological, and on the other, the sort of sense of spectral dread. You know, I think both of those, you know, come to some extent out of my childhood. Yeah.
There's 2 points I'd like to pick up on. One being relating to your stories. There's one effect that repeats throughout a number of your stories that I find is very reminiscent of childhood psychological trauma, and it often brings it up in me when I'm reading it, is in a lot of your stories, there is an element of being just safety being just out of hand, just out of reach, just beyond your fingertips, like in Hands, when you know, the story Hands, a short story Hands. He breaks into a room and he realizes he's not going to be able to cross the room to get out before the people who are chasing him are going to get him, or the people, I say people, they're not really, or in Cold Print even, which is one of my absolute favorite stories, he's trapped again. He's trapped in the room, and he turns around, and there's no way he's going to make it across the dusty old locked up bookstore before Eaglenack engulfs him. And it also, in one of your most popular stories, again, it's, and the entire story is got the reader on edge about, like, where is she, where, you know, like there's an element of it's really nerve-wracking, and that ties in with abandonment,
Yes.
issues very strongly, and I felt that that you deal with that fear extremely effectively and wield it well. The other thing I wanted to say was in The Faces at Pine Dunes, another one of your great short stories. There's a scene, one moment that is so authentic that it just knocks me, it stops my breath, is when the father hugs the son,
Yes. Yes.
and the son's revulsion at the physical proximity of the father, who is somewhat, he's abusive to his wife, the mother of the main character, and forgive me, I can't remember the main character's name. I should have looked it up before, but
So there you go. Never
but
mind.
it's a wonderful story, nevertheless. It also ultimately refers to the inheritability of being a
Yes.
bad person at the end, right? With
Yeah.
his girlfriend. But
Monstrous. Yes.
the moment where the father engulfs the obese father and hugs his son, and it seems like a genuine attempt on the father's part to connect with his son, but it's too late. Like it's not possible.
That's
And
absolutely it. Yes, I would
it's
say that.
heartbreaking.
Yes.
It's just heartbreaking, a moment in the middle of this horror story. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's an element. That's kind of what elevates your prose, your writing above the average horror writer, like well above the average, like like puts you in the top pinnacle. Is your willingness to broach difficult
Yeah.
emotional territory, to travel difficult emotional territory, and to be very to be true to it, and you're not like not to put down Sean Houston or
For sure.
the crab, right? Those are fun in their own way, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's more than, it's not pulp fiction. It's real literature.
Well, thank you very much. I
Oh,
mean, just to pick up on that one thing. I mean, you kind of remind me that by the time at the very end, by the time I did have a sort of chance to interact with my father, who was on his deathbed, and I couldn't do it. I was just impossible. And when I think about it, that story was written several years later. So whether I can't say I was conscious of drawing upon that. I didn't want to touch the guy. It was too late,
yeah.
in hospital. But you could certainly, I think you kind of pinned it down there, that it's entirely possible that was, at the back of my mind somewhere, or something to draw upon. Because I'm a great believer in basically just sort of telling the story, and my subconscious seems to be getting on with doing other stuff, with that kind of, engaging more profoundly with profoundly is perhaps the wrong word, but more intensely, if you like, with the material, while I'm apparently just getting on with, the nuts and bolts of the narrative. You see what I mean? I think
Yes,
those
yes.
things do come into play, even when I don't know that I'm doing it. And often, it can be sort of retrospective in a way.
Yeah.
The story of the chimney, the old story of the chimney, which again, in which the father becomes this sort of monstrous Santa Claus figure. It's not a direct thing, but on every Christmas day, my mother would send me up to knock on my father's bedroom door and say, do you want to come down for Christmas dinner? Which is a ghastly ritual. It would be a kind of, grumble of dissent from the other side of the door, and I would then kind of hair off downstairs again, thinking, thank God that's over for another year. And obviously, you could see in a way that fed into that story of mine. But the extraordinary thing is, I still remember doing this. It wasn't until years later, I was reading the story at Jack Sullivan's apartment in New York. There was the people like Gahan Wilson and who else would there be? Ted Klein, certainly, probably in the audience, because Jack would invite friends around, when I was over for me to do readings. And I thought, when I finished reading the story, I beg your pardon, or maybe somewhere in the middle of it, I thought, my God, that's what that story's been about all the time. And I genuinely had not realized this strange, revelation about.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. I was going to say also, the whole tradition is for me, being a North American person, a person living on this side of the pond, there is not the tradition that there is in England and Scotland and Ireland of the Christmas ghost story, of the Christmas scary, spooky Christmas tale.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
of course, everybody knows the Christmas Carol, Dickens, but
Yes.
that's it. You know, that's the
No.
one that stands for all here.
Yes,
But in
yes.
England, so for me, you're like the main purveyor of Christmas spookiness, right?
Right. Well, I've written quite a few actually. It's strange, but people keep asking me to do it. Possibly this is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. I've written some, so people come and say, "Well, do another one then."
Well,
it does happen.
it is a tradition, even on TV and stuff. They have,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yes,
There's
very much so. And of course, M.R. James used to read his stories to friends at Christmas. A lot of those stories were written for exactly that purpose.
Yeah, so it's still a tradition. I mean, didn't The Woman in Black air on Christmas?
I think it's probable. Yes, I would think so. Yes.
And that left scarred many a child, I imagine.
Oh, good Lord, yes. And of course, also the stone tape, the
oh my
Nigel
God,
Neal, which is a very fine one. Back in the early 70s, that was. And I remember we were all terrified to go upstairs alone afterwards. I remember that.
The stone tape is a very odd,
Yeah.
The other thing I was gonna but that's what I was gonna ask. Do you feel compelled to continue the tradition, or is it because you're asked for?
It's because I'm asked, really.
Okay.
I mean, also, I get the occasional idea that I figure, that may have a Christmas connotation, because a lot of my stuff tends to come out of just. Again, you see, this goes back to childhood, if you like. This whole thing about the differences of perception, if you like, what's perceived and what is real. And that's probably not quite the same thing, but often enough, it's just something very ordinary, an ordinary object, an ordinary event, an everyday event. And I'll suddenly find myself thinking, yes, but what if? Turning it slightly to look at it a different way. And this
plastic Santa on the roof.
Well, that was one of them. Of course it was. Yeah. So it can be anything at all. And, often enough, it is around Christmas. I think I must have murdered just about every Christmas tradition by now, though. I don't know whether I've left anything standing or
not. I'll move on to my next point here is, you've long been fortunate to count among your most fervent admirers pretty much the cream of the crop in terms of horror writing and the horror world in general, film. From the world's premier Lovecraft scholar, S.T. Joshi, who calls you pretty much the greatest living writer of horror, and also, director Guillermo. Oh.
Yes.
Okay, this meeting no longer has a time limit. Okay,
right.
Sorry, I got a message from Zoom.
I just saw that too. Don't worry. Yes.
Yeah, it's weird.
If you want to just start that question over, I was wondering if it was going to kick us out, but I guess we're good.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will be in. You've long been fortunate to count among your most fervent admirers, pretty much the cream of the crop in the horror world. Everyone from Lovecraft scholar S.T. Joshi, who calls you the best that we have, and all the way to Oscar winner Guillermo del Toro, who recently, actually, and I'll send you this because I think you might want to hear it. You might have heard it already, but during episode 95 of the King Cast, a popular podcast about the works of Stephen King, del Toro, did you hear that? He name dropped you?
Yes, I did indeed, actually. Yes, okay. Yes.
And he said that your stories were the only ones that frighten him and leave him shook up. So that's a heck of a
that's all right. Yes.
coming from Benicio and not Benicio, Guillermo rather.
Yeah,
who's a very nice. He's a not only a nice fellow, but he's got a lot of projects in the works, including some anthology projects, which I'm hoping he might be able to pick one or two of your stories.
I think I can probably say that's a distinct possibility without going into any detail. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, great. So, has that helped at all? Like there's been a recent surge in mainstream critical attention being paid to your work too. There's been the laudatory profiles in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Los Angeles Times Review of Books, and even the Washington Post had a big full page on you that was really really, laudatory.
Yeah.
And Trevor Kennedy's wonderful Phantasmagoria #4 that devoted
Yes,
entirely to you.
absolutely. Yes, that's right.
And this it's just a really great compendium of work about and for you in art and anything relating to your bibliography and all that.
Mhm.
Did a good job. Has there been a commensurate? This seems to have all been happening in the last couple of years. Has there been like an increase in sales? I see also like you're being more available in. I mean, your heyday was in the 80s, definitely, with the horror boom.
Yes.
Financial heyday,
Sure.
or successful heyday rather. But
Mhm.
you never stopped writing. But it seems like now that we're seeing you more, and I'm seeing you more in bookstores, the big bookstores, and
Good.
I'm seeing a return to kind of a return to horror being a genre that is paid some attention to.
Yes.
And have you noticed anything or?
Well, I haven't seen any sales figures, but it seems like the publishers are pretty happy. And I mean, the splendid Flame Tree Press, particularly, they've been. I think it's probably those books that you've been seeing in the bookstores at a guess. Well, there you see, that's one of them. Exactly so. That's the guys. Flame Tree.
Yeah.
And they're certainly sufficiently happy that I can't go into too much public detail, but they certainly just picked up more backlist as well as as well as having done the contract for this next. Well, where are we now? Next year's novel it will be, isn't it? It's now 2022, right? A new novel from them, but also backlist is in the pipeline. So if they're happy, you better believe I am. Absolutely. And let's not forget PS Publishing either.
Yes, of course. I mean, they're more of a
they're great indies basically, and they've been supporting me since the turn of the century. It actually was the turn of the century where they started publishing me with The Darkest Part of the Woods, or if you have a rare edition of it and look on the spine, The Darkest Part of the Wads, because they let the know out. Much to Pete Crowther's dismay.
There's a typo on it?
Yeah, on the spine. And I still remember Pete ringing me up because he was one of the early PS books, and he'd all come in from the printers, and he got these piles on his desk and was admiring them, and all of a sudden his eye went to the spine, and I think he quaked within and rang me up, and I actually said, "Look, it's okay, Pete. All right. It'll be fun for the collector," but he insisted on having it redone. What happened then was my next novel, which I think I might say was The Overnight, I dedicated to Pete and Nikki Crowther, who are the centre of PS Publishing. And so what I said was, in the dedication for Pete and Nikki, who got me out of the wads. As the reprint. The trouble was that when the American edition appeared, a copy editor carefully corrected my errors, so it made no sense anymore. So what can you do?
That's it. It a little bit reminds me of Ted Klein's Black Man with a Horn.
Yes.
When the gentleman's on his way back on the plane. And he's thinking about how they had announced his epic collection, Tales from the Garve.
Yes, that's right. I remember.
He said, "Is this what it's come to? Tales from the Garve?"
Yes, absolutely, yes.
But along with, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that there's been for you a career upswing and a resurgence. Which is absolutely merited. Even if you didn't write a single new thing from now on, though I don't want you to stop.
No, you can't stop me. No, you bet. I can hold a pen. No.
And it is a pen. It's you write in a yellow legal pad, I believe.
Oh, no, it's one of these things. There you go. It's a basic Parker fountain pen. That's what I use.
Parker fountain.
every morning up here at the desk when I'm talking to you. Yeah.
So you have a routine, like that morning routine of writing?
Yeah, pretty well 6 in the morning or so, maybe a bit earlier. I'm going to be at it basically. And in fact, I'm working well before I get to the desk because I believe very much. Well, I don't even believe it's a compulsion, but I can't not do it. But the stuff is beginning to go, to work itself out in there before I ever get near the desk. And so I'm going around the house with notebooks on my iPhone, and recording stuff as I go. And by the time I got to the desk, I've got a whole bunch of sentences. But one routine thing I always do have is I always work out at least the first sentence before I sit down to write. That way you're not, confronted with this horrible blank page and you don't know what to put on it because you've got what you're going to put on it first. And that will pretty well always lead to, the next thing.
Now that sounds like a piece of really good advice for would-be writers. Do you have any other?
I know I will always say, don't. I'm not saying you must do this, but try it, see if it works for you.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other rituals?
You see, but my things are things that work for me. I don't plot a novel in advance. I like to gather a lot of material, certainly. And,
really?
I've got notebooks for all the stuff before I ever start the actual writing of the novel. But I've got a general sense of possibly the major events, or some of them anyway, and the order in which they're likely to occur. But in terms of actually, plotting scene by scene, no, I'd much rather the thing grew of itself. Now, I mean, it's a fraught process because you can end up, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, wondering what the hell you got here and where do I go now? I have on occasion come close. Well, certainly, thought, am I going to have to abandon this because I don't know what I'm doing anymore? But no, what I found is if I've done it this way, there's going to be stuff in the early part that I thought was just peripheral or just background, or just circumstantial detail. But actually, no, that's the foundation for where I need to go next. And if I let it grow of itself, organically, I find that's how it works. As I say, it could be a pretty nerve-wracking experience, but yeah, it's worth doing. That's how I do it anyway.
That's intriguing to me because I've just finished your trilogy, Three Births of Dowloth, and I cannot. Not that I can't believe you. I'm not saying I'm not calling you a liar.
I understand.
I can't understand how someone could write something that involved and that it's the lives of three major characters that over 3 full-length novels.
Sure.
And it's so beautifully structured in this 3-act way, like their school lives, their adult lives, and then they're kind of like their not post-adult, but they're middle ages.
Yeah. Buggers like me, basically, is what you're trying to be polite and not say. That's what you mean.
Well, but it's just first of all, I'm surprised that I haven't seen that structure elsewhere. I'm sure that it exists somewhere, in some trilogy elsewhere, but it's a wonderful idea for a structure for a novel. And
well, that was the thing, you see. I mean, this again was good old Pete Crowther at PS. I mean, he'd been sort of gently, in a very friendly way, but chivying away at me, saying, look, somebody ought to do a horror trilogy. Why don't you give it a shot? I think he actually did perhaps suggested it should be sort of drawing on my mythos as well. I'm not quite sure if that's the case or not, but certainly the trilogy was emphatically was his idea. And you see, the thing with me is, the only reason, as far as I'm concerned, to write in a particular form is if there's an actual reason to write in that form. So, it wouldn't do just to write a huge long novel and chop it into three books.
No,
that would not for me anyway, And I wanted to find an actual justification for having 3 volumes, and that became it, as you say, the 3 periods of their lives, separated by about 3 decades each. And so, we do follow them through almost their entire lives. Of course, meanwhile, alongside that, the occult threat and the family that is responsible, that is also growing, but also sort of growing in power and influence. So all those parallel things are going on. But no, I mean, that wasn't plotted in advance. Again, as I say, I do I did have a lot of the major scenes kind of in my notes in some form, although very often for me the act of writing is getting up in the morning, thinking about the scene I'm planning to write and thinking, no, actually that's not going to work. I've got this wrong. I'm going to have to rethink this, which I duly do. So part of the process is that sort of winnowing of the material, but only when I've got my nose up against it and I've got to write it.
Right. I would like to go back for a second to and get your opinion on the new wave of horror, because of this, like I was saying, that your new upswing in popularity and readership. What do you think of the new wave of horror fiction in general? Many factors have come together, like many sub movements combining into a larger, more all-encompassing movement, like such as I'm thinking of the horror literature identity crisis that has recently been highlighted by Grady Hendrix in his following the publication of his best-selling Paperbacks from Hell, where you have a significant presence in there.
Sure.
It's about the artwork of the covers and how that can be used to highlight the stories and
just interrupting very, very briefly.
Yeah, sure.
If you ever get a chance to see Grady do his illustrated lecture, don't miss it. It's a great deal of fun. It's even more fun than the book is. So,
oh really?
If he ever comes near you, make sure you're there.
I'll try. I'll definitely try. I know he does come to Toronto sometimes, so
okay.
Which is where I am.
Yes, yes.
But his work, that book and his lectures and his stuff that he's put online recently, including and that other people have put online based on his work, have sparked a bit of a reckoning in the publishing industry. He's asking why horror books don't look like horror books anymore. They've been stripped of all their traditional visual signifiers and coding. Yeah. And demanding a return to the same, with evolution and improvement, of course. And also there's that, and also there's the huge influence of technology, which has recently really flowered with some interesting and impressive storytelling innovations, like people using forums, online blogs, and podcasts to do stuff like the collaborative SCP experiment. I don't know if you know about these. Mother Horse Eyes and Lore. They've grown beyond all expectations. Some of them, yeah, it's really sparked a whole new kind of new genres even of horror. And are you aware of that at all, or
not too much? So no, actually, that's all news to me. So I shall look at it later. Yeah.
I mean, some of it's not of the best quality. The stuff that relies on the average Joe to participate, you'll get gems in there, like the SCP. SCP is a spectral containment protocol, CPI, and it's about different creatures and what it takes to keep them, locked away from the public. And people create their own different creatures, spectral monsters, and demons and things. And what it takes to keep them safe away from the public. But it's fun, and so it's led to books and things like that. Now, if this being Cosmic Horror Monthly, I would like to take some time to explore some of the details of your contributions to the mythos. And I know that, like you said today, you started off writing about New England, but that was very brief before you were correctly persuaded to write what you know and set your concepts in and around your stomping grounds of Liverpool, your home ground.
Well, eventually, because mind you, of course, Bridchester and those places were up in the Cotswolds. Actually down in the Cotswolds, further south from here by some hours drive. To tell you the truth, to be horribly honest about it, I hadn't been there either. So it's not that much more realistic than my New England was in the first instance. It was only later when because my wife actually was living in the Cotswolds when we met. So we went to the science fiction convention, but so I did get to visit there, and I got more of a sense of it after that. But it's only really Because you see, Cold Print, the story, it's set in Bridchester, but really that's a disguised Liverpool.
Yes.
Really, it's Liverpool and in all but name. And so, I really began to, to own up to setting the stuff in or deriving it from Liverpool. That's where a lot of them are set since then.
I had guessed that it might be Manchester because of the name, Birchester, Manchester, but another northern town. But
yes,
I'm
Manchester figures in a couple of them. Yeah.
But the way I've absorbed it over the years, the Birchester mythos features the following major figures. I don't want to call them deities or anything because they're of different power levels, definitely. But you've got Glaaki, Daola, Ihort, and Igolonak, who is my favorite.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
in terms of name and appearance. But so with Glaaki, we've got in your collection the inhabitant of the lake and another what is it? The inhabitant of the lake and other unwelcome tenants.
yes. Well, that was my original title, but of course it wasn't the title that was on the Arkham book because it got Derleth actually notified the wrong version of the title to Frank Uppertall, who was the cover artist, and so it actually came out from Arkham as and what is it and less welcome tenants. Now it's unlikely we have a less welcome talent than Glaaki, it seems to me, but there you go.
Actually, I'm thinking it's in Visions from Birchester.
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's in Visions from Birchester, the second volume of your mythos.
Yes.
But same, you need to have both if you're interested in your mythos work.
Sure.
You definitely need both, and they're beautiful books. They're handsomely put together. They're solid, and they're like beautiful bricks of things. And they've got so much extra material, like your early versions of stories. I think even pre-August Derleth, one of two of them.
That's right.
And it's beautiful, and the artwork by Randy Broker. It's just I love it all throughout as well. The story art, it's beautiful line art. I love that kind of art as well. That highly detailed black.
Me too.
Just great stuff. The correspondence of Cameron Thaddeus Nash, the illustration that accompanies that one is great with the H.P. Lovecraft's head on a long snaky neck. It's great. But that's the one that the last revelation of Glaaki is in, and that could be that's a more recent one, right?
Yes. Well, that's the thing, you see, as with the insects and the dark spot of the woods, I kind of felt that in that first book, I'd come up with the ideas, but I wasn't really able fully to develop, if you like, the cosmic elements of those ideas. I mean, Derleth obviously is a particular one with the whole notion of the render of the veils, the being that can show you the reality behind everything we take for granted, which of course goes all the way back to themes we were talking about earlier in a way, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Even there, I was doing it unconsciously, if you like, drawing upon my experience. But my feeling was simply that these days I might want to give the ideas another shot and see if I can, convey more cosmicism, if you like. And so that's what I tried to do in the last revelation. But I had a lot of fun with it too, because there's a certain amount of dark humor in it. I do believe in that story. But I quite like. I think the finale has got a certain touch of the cosmic to it. I think it builds up to something pretty spectacular. And
I hadn't read it until.
Sorry, you go ahead. Yeah.
I hadn't read it until recently.
Yes.
And when I knew I would be interviewing you, I wanted to read it. So you sent it also to me, but I got this hard copy, and I really I thought it was. I love fiction that's based around books, like the film. There's a film with Johnny Depp as he goes and
The Ninth Gate.
The Ninth Gate, that's right.
Yes.
it reminded me a little bit of The Ninth Gate, which I love that movie. And
yes, very fine. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I was thinking of the fellow, picturing Johnny in my head a little bit.
Right, yes.
And his frustrations at the locals and the way they were, the way they were frustrating his attempts to get all 9
Well, yes,
editions.
it's a book collector's nightmare as well. That's for sure. Yeah.
I love that kind of, it's like a little, it's like almost like a caper too, like Snoop kind of story.
Yeah.
But so that's a novella. It's like 100 pages, pretty much. And so that's like, you could see that as your latest and perhaps last Gla'aki story. The trilogy could be seen as your kind of ultimate statement on Daoloth.
Oh yes, I think so. Yes.
And so are Ihort and Igolonak going to get the same treatment?
I think it's unlikely, because I think old Igolonak, I think I did him justice, and I think there's a limit to what you could do with him in a way.
Yeah.
His effects and his influence are very limited in a way. But I think that story deals with them pretty much. I don't know. I guess it was funny enough. It's odd you should mention that, because I was looking at him recently again. That one story, Before the Storm. Actually, he gets a reference in the fragmented paragraphs as well. Now I think about it. Again, whether there's much more to be done with him, I don't know, because funny enough, I can't go into any real detail about this, but in the new year, I shall actually, I'm going to be finding myself writing 3 new mythos stories, because I've had 3 separate invitations. I don't like turning people down if I can avoid it, And at first I thought, well, no, I haven't any more ideas. And I thought, oh, yes, I've got one. And then I thought, oh, no, hang on, I've got another one. And so ultimately, I got the 3, so they will be done. But those creatures are not in them, no. So the answer at the moment would be probably not on them.
Did I miss any? Is there any other major figure?
I think that does it, doesn't it? Well, there's the unnamed chap under Warrendown.
Yeah,
I think he's probably pretty well, done with.
yeah,
I think that would be all, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think so.
There's some things that are mythos adjacent, maybe, but like one of my favorite novels of yours. We haven't talked a lot about the earlier novels, but I love Ancient Images so much.
Thank you.
The stick creatures in that are great, but even more greater than any monster element is the whole idea of the lost Karloff Lugosi film that has to be hunted down, and the occult subplot of that is wonderful. And my very favorite, and I just recently reread it, and it holds up. Not just holds up; it's better than I remember. Is Hungry Moon.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Hungry Moon, with its absolutely terrifying group of villagers.
Yes.
The people who live in what's it called? Moonwell.
Yeah.
They are the unpleasantest bunch of beating that child for reading Wonder Woman comic books, and the whole really, the creepy couple, and the weird cult that comes. It's wonderful. Also, the idea of a place kind of appearing on and disappearing from the map.
Yes, I'm fond of that. Yeah,
that's the one. It's like Brigadoon, but horrible.
Yes, yes, the dark side of Brigadoon. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
We in this issue of Cosmic Horror Monthly, we're lucky enough to be reprinting your story, Slow, which I believe it's the first time it's being reprinted anywhere except for in the chapbook that you originally sold it at.
I'm not sure, but okay.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find it anywhere. But
it's certainly seldom been reprinted. That's for certain. Yeah.
I think the only place it was ever printed was in the we've got a new artist to do a piece for it that's very nice.
Excellent.
I'm sure you'd like to. I'll send you a copy as soon as I get it.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything you'd like to say about that story? Because it's a rare bit of science fiction from you.
Yes, well, I'll say this first of all. You see, I think I'm very bad at science fiction, generally speaking. I mean, back in the early, well, I'll tell you what, shortly after I went full time as a writer, which was in 1973, it was actually 11 years after my first professional publication. It seemed like my agent then, good old Kirby Macaulay, sadly long gone, or several years gone. He said, "Well, look, horror's not really selling much. There aren't any markets, so you need to diversify." So I did a bit of fantasy, which I think was not too bad. Some of those stories. Now, I tried science fiction. I really, whenever I felt I was writing science fiction, I kind of seized up. I don't know why, but I did. My style kind of atrophied somehow or stiffened, whatever the word might be, and it got very, very sort of ponderous, I think is the word. Just occasionally I would have an idea like Slow, and that was one where I think that was written later on, a few years later. And I think partly because I didn't have to write it, because I wasn't being told, look, you've got to write science fiction, this may have been it, that I thought, okay, I'll go with this, see where it takes me. And I did kind of like this whole idea, which is obviously not new, of the Earth man kept in some kind of, whatever it might be, a prison, a sort of prison. But the notion of the creature that slows time down, that had that sort of sufficiently nightmarish quality to it that I thought, all right, well, I'll give it a go, And I think because I didn't have to do very much science fictional paraphernalia within it, there wasn't much in the world of world building or building future technology, which I think are the things I found most daunting about trying to write science fiction. Whereas, if I'd done it the sort of Ray Bradbury way, except Ray used to say he never did write science fiction, he wrote fantasy, according to him. I could have probably done it, You just leave the details of the technology out, you don't bother with that. Then I might have written more. But I think, Slow, I think the nightmare was, sufficiently engaged me that I did have quite a good time. And oddly enough, because you were mentioning Trevor Kennedy's Phantasmagoria magazine, I think it was Thana Niveau who chose that as a favourite story, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
So there you go. So that's a recommendation from
it's a great recommendation. It's a great little story. It's short. It's the creature is unique. the kind of an egg with teeth on top of a kind of a floating snake body. It's pretty.
Although weirdly enough, do you not think? I know I wrote it before this, but it's weirdly a bit like those things that the lady behind the radiator tramples in Eraserhead. Now I think about this, isn't it?
Eraserhead.
David Lynch?
It does look like Eraserhead, but Eraserhead came out in '78, though that was written in.
I think mine was, I don't know which way around that was, and who came, it doesn't matter, I mean, nobody's copying anybody.
Right.
But, it's a kind of strange parallel. And of course, there are also, the navigators in Dune, the David Lynch movie that look uncannily sperm-like, if you remember. So I think that may have been the back of both. Both minds had that in mind, I suspect that.
Yeah, your little guy definitely. Well, little. He's big enough to eat a person.
Yes.
He. I didn't think of that. That he looks like a spermatozoa, sperm cell. And that's true. Yeah, he's like. But it's very. I like it's evocative. It's a strange. It's nightmarish. It's the whole kind of distorting of the perception is very well handled. I love it. This I've been trying to get a hold of that story. Been trying to buy it. The
Oh, the actual chapbook.
Yeah, the chapbook for so long, and none of them will deliver, like online. None of them will deliver to Canada. It's
Oh
very
dear,
frustrating.
oh, that's annoying. Oh, that's annoying. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when I saw that they were getting it for Cosmic Horror Monthly, I was like, yes, that's such a what a coincidence, what a good stroke of luck on my part.
Yeah.
Um, and there's one. Is there anything you'd like to touch on before we go? I did want to ask you about the just offhand the Sandy Peterson
Yes.
uh figure that like do you have a set of those?
I do. They're great. Yes. Oh no, I'm
Yeah.
very taken with those. Yes, indeed. I mean, now I was very pleased to do by the way they visualize them. I
Yeah.
mean, of course, I suppose the one thing we would have to say is that theoretically, Daedalus is impossible to. I mean, you know, by definition, it's impossible to depict in a sculpture. You know, but
Yeah.
they did a remarkably good job on him. And of course, I then in the trilogy, I then had it brought in a different avatar, which theoretically you can sculpt, I suppose, the way
Yeah.
it's described.
Mhm.
But there you are, it's too late now, so I'm sorry, guys, and I'm sorry, Sandy, I gave you such a problem, but you solved it magnificently, in my view.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great fun to I was watching and I was wondering if that was gonna, and within, I mean, I guess the fans demanded it immediately because within months of the Cthulhu Wars becoming a thing, they announced, oh, we're going to have a Ramsey Campbell mythos.
Yeah, that's right.
So
That's right.
that's a nice, that must be a nice feeling as well.
It's extraordinary because, as I say, really, that these are things I created in my mid-teens, and they've haunted my life ever since, and they're probably waiting for me in the afterlife when I say
Oh
goodbye
God,
to you guys.
one hopes not.
Well, it
Well,
depends on who gets the better of whom.
That's
Damn
pretty
it!
much all
I
the questions I
created you guys. You do what I say.
had. Was there anything else you'd like that you wish to cover, or?
Well, I suppose the only thing really to say, I mean, it's why don't you ask me the interviewer's great question? What are you working on? Go on, ask me the question.
Well, you brought it up a few times during the interview. Right now, what are you working on?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I thought you'd never ask. Well, what I'm actually working on right now is a novel called The Lonely Lands, which is well, without going into huge detail, because I don't like talking about work in progress, but it's about the afterlife and the problems that we may cause in it. We the living. However, the other thing, perhaps more relevant to our magazine, is that next year's novel, a book called Fell Stones, which is a single word, fell stones, but
yes.
Single word, which is the name of a monument that lends its name to an English village, and which proves to have a sort of cosmic connection. I mean, these 7 stones that, as it turns out, have been called down by an alchemist for reasons of his own in the days of alchemy, to discover they had far more cosmic properties than he was able to cope with. And so this, if you like, is my next British mythos story, although not set geographically there, but certainly drawing on that sort of general sense of, it's my latest attempt to do what I admire Lovecraft and Ted Klein and other writers, Machen, Blackwood, so much for, and I'm still trying to achieve. So, wish me luck.
Oh, I don't think you need it, but I will do so. Good luck. The other thing I did was you recently put out, PS recently put out 2 volumes of your nonfiction.
Oh, yes.
Which are excellent. Your nonfiction is excellent. It's
thank you.
In a number of different places where you review film and basically cultural essays, and it's a lot of fun. So, in your capacity as a film reviewer, has there been what do you have any picks for this year? What you think were some of the finest films of the year? They don't have to be horror, but
Well, you see, the one problem is we've not been going out to the movies just purely because of the pandemic. You know, we've not been inside a cinema for must be 2 years now. Though to be honest, we weren't going hugely much simply because we've got a great Blu-ray system, and you know, I quite like watching film in the comforts of home. And there are directors, we will not name them, whose films need subtitling even though they're in English because you can't make out the dialogue on occasion. But I won't mention Christopher Nolan anyway.
Because of the loud noise.
Absolutely, yes.
But they don't have to, you don't have to have gone out of the house to like
no.
You've watched at home as well.
A few films that have taken my fancy in various different ways. A remarkable, is it German or Austrian film called Shirley, which is a film in which nearly every shot is like a reproduction of an Edward Hopper painting. It's absolutely astounding. It's like, you know, the paintings have come to life before your eyes. It's obviously a combination of the sets and the lighting and the you know, the costuming of the characters and their body language. And it's like nothing else. Well, it's like Edward Hopper, but you know, in terms of the cinema, it's like nothing else I've ever seen. It is quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
What else have I seen of late? I mean, I've been running through many classics. I still go back to Make Way for Tomorrow, a Carey movie, which Orson Welles famously said would make a stone weep. And if you haven't seen it, well, I think you'll when you see it, you'll find you may agree. Mid-30s movie, extraordinarily fine. I've been, here's something for you, because perhaps the other thing that you may not know about, or you may, I don't know, but those who don't know about will recoil, I suspect. I'm pretty nearly finished a 70,000-word study of the Three Stooges. So I've been watching a lot of Three Stooges movies. Absolutely. I've watched all the Three Stooges movies that are extant, which is pretty well everything as far as I know, and even movies in which they themselves appeared, you know, apart from the team. But of course, if it's not Three Stooges, it's as I put it in the title, it's Six Stooges and counting. Because, you know, the personnel, you know, varied, well, you know, not Moe and Larry, but the third Stooge, you know, went through such a series of replacements, you know, and substitutions, that it becomes the whole, you know, saga in itself, that whole side of things. Now, one film I was surprised to like as much as I did, although perhaps that's being unfair anyway, and I think it's you know, really quite substantial, is No Time to Die, the James Bond movie, of which I'll say very little in case there are people listening who don't know about one major issue with that film. If you don't know about it, just don't know about it, watch the film. But it's already out on home video. It looks wonderful on 4K.
Yeah.
But it's very powerful stuff in its way. I mean, it you know, has an emotional charge I wasn't quite prepared for. And if I say it's moving, well, you know, maybe you don't think it could be, but well, take a look inside. And it also has the most, I mean, by gum, I think, you know, one of the pre-credit sequences to end all pre-credit sequences, which is 22 minutes long, and could very well have been a complete feature film given the amount of material it contains. But no, that's just the setting up, by gum. Very impressed.
Do you seek out horror films at all?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, say again.
Do you seek out horror films? Like, do you like horror
movies? Do I seek out horror films? Yes, I do. Oh, yes. Good Lord, yes. I mean, certainly. And, you know, I try and keep up with new developments. So, yes, funnily enough, to come back to someone we've been talking about quite a bit in the course of this interview, we saw Grady Hendrix's movie, you know, Satanic Panic. Produced by Fangoria.
I didn't realize he was behind that.
He wrote it. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's a bit like early Peter Jackson. You know, it's pretty graphic, but also very funny, witty, as you might expect from Grady. So that's definitely worth picking up. And now you see, because I watch at least as many, you know, reruns and classics as I do new films.
Yes.
I mean, for the record, again, something we were talking about, I did like Mark Gattis's Christmas Ghost Story this year, the mezzo tint,
Oh
which
yeah,
is actually,
the classic.
I thought it was a very able fleshing out of the original story. Because in
Yeah,
the original story, the one problem is that there's no present threat. Basically it's
yeah.
all happened, and what you're seeing is an image of something's happened in the past, and it's creepy, but it's not actively frightening. He worked out, I thought very ingeniously, worked out a context in which it becomes immediately frightening. Well, I'll say no more than that, but take a look at
I'll
it.
seek that out. I love Mark Gatiss. Have you met him?
I like his work, yes, and
Yeah,
as an actor as well as a
yeah.
writer. But yeah. So check that out.
Blackadder and
Yes,
I hold in my
absolutely.
hand a lump of
Yes.
Turner's green.
Yeah, yes. But all the League of Gentlemen guys, of course, have got this connection with our field. I mean, perhaps particularly Jeremy Dyson, who's written a whole bunch of stories in the field. The Haunted Book, his novel, is very well worth seeking out, and so is his film with Andy Nyman, Ghost Stories. It's an
Yeah, that's
movie.
wonderful. That
Yeah,
is
very
wonderful.
fun. And for me, better on a second viewing, actually, when more things fall into place, in fact.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think one final one, because just going back to the classics, and I was kind of rather pleased and surprised this. I'd not seen this film for 50 years, and I remember not being that impressed. But there's a movie called The Asphyx, from 1972 really
It's got a lot
tricky.
of big stars in it, right? Like
Yes.
Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got quite a distinguished cast, but I mean, I don't know much about the people involved in, the actual production, the actual writer and director. But it has a genuinely original Gothic premise. It feels like a film based on, a sort of lost supernatural Gothic novel, but no, it's an original idea, and it is an actual original idea. It's not something I've come across before. I mean, I think there are a couple of bumpy moments, but it's far outweighed, or those are far outweighed by the very serious approach, like an early Hammer film, although it's not Hammer. And it works remarkably well, and I was very glad to revisit it. So that's my tip for a film ripe for rediscovery, of which
That's a number of tips. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. If I can recommend one to you, have you seen The Empty Man?
Not yet.
It's wonderful. It's really interesting. It almost got buried under because of all kinds of studio shenanigans, but it got rescued just by sheer word of mouth and people seeing it and saying, "Damn, this thing is magnificent," and it really is. And eventually, I'd love to see or hear what you think of it.
I shall take a look. Well, I have one more for you, actually, now I think about this. Although this is for folks with strong nerves only, let me tell you. It's a recent film onto home video by Gaspar Noé, the French director.
Always tough,
Perhaps most famous or infamous, if you like, for Irreversible, which I recently watched again, and on that, I've not yet managed to nerve myself to look at this, but there's the reversed version of it on the disc as well, or on a separate disc. In other words, he's edited it in chronological order forwards. I don't know if I could cope with that, because the version we've seen, the Irreversible version, at least ends on a sort of note of tragic redemptiveness, if you like, because the horrible stuff is basically all in the first half. Now, I think if you actually watched it and all that stuff is yet to come, I'm not sure I could cope, frankly, but we'll see. I'm going to have to try. But no, the film I was going to name is Climax, a more recent film of his, which is a really quite, I think all these films are pretty extraordinary. This is about a dance troupe who, in the first about 10 minutes of the movie, I suppose, are basically just a great dance improvisation by everybody. And apparently he encouraged everybody to improvise throughout the film. And then they celebrate, afterwards. Trouble is, somebody spiked the punch with acid. Yes. And the rest of the film is everything coming apart. And it becomes an utter nightmare. And quite frankly, unless you have strong nerves, then you may find it very hard to take. But if you can take it, it's very well worth your attention. So Gaspar Noé, Climax, my horror recommendation for the year.
I've seen it. I second your recommendation, and I second your warning about the strong stomach necessary. It's wonderful, but very disturbing and greatly put together. Like the visuals it's masterful, but it's terrifying. So we've kept you on here for an hour and 20 minutes. And I know you said an hour maximum, and I so appreciate your time, Ramsey.
Hey, my pleasure.
It's been magnificent. I appreciate it. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and appreciate being able to speak with you about these subjects.
Well, listen, Mark and Charles, thank you very much for having me. It's great to see you.
It was fantastic talking to you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again sometime in future under other circumstances.